I always thought I had time. Not in an abstract way. I didn't feel immortal or careless. I just believed that life moved in chapters, and that the important ones would announce themselves clearly. I thought there would be a moment when something inside me would say, now. This is when it begins. So I waited. I didn't waste my life recklessly. I didn't destroy anything. I showed up, did what was expected of me, and made choices that felt reasonable. I avoided disasters. I avoided embarrassment. I avoided risks that didn't come with guarantees. From the outside, it looked like patience. Inside, it was hesitation dressed up as maturity. I told myself that people who rush into things regret them later. That caution is wisdom. That it's better to wait until you're sure of yourself, sure of the outcome, sure that you won't look back and feel foolish. I didn't realize that certainty never arrives on its own. At first, waiting felt temporary. Like standing in a hallway between rooms. I assumed I would step forward eventually. I just needed more clarity, more stability, more confidence. I believed those things would accumulate naturally if I stayed where I was long enough. Days passed. Then months. Then years. Nothing collapsed. That's what made it easy to ignore. My life didn't demand urgency. It functioned quietly. I paid my bills. I kept routines. I answered messages. I moved through days that didn't hurt enough to push me and didn't excite me enough to pull me. I lived in the middle. I remember the first time I noticed how quiet my life had become. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet where nothing presses against you, nothing asks for your full attention. I could go through entire days without feeling truly present in any of them. That scared me, briefly. Then I told myself it was normal. I told myself adulthood feels like this. That intensity fades. That you're not supposed to feel alive all the time. I convinced myself that longing was something you outgrow once you learn how the world actually works. So I stopped listening to it. Whenever I felt the urge to change something, to move, to leave, to begin, I postponed it. Just not now. Just until things were clearer. Just until I felt ready. Later it became my answer to everything that mattered. People around me didn't question it. Why would they? I looked stable. Calm. Responsible. I wasn't visibly unhappy. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. I learned how to keep my uncertainty private. They assumed I knew what I was doing. I let them believe that. Inside, something was slowly disengaging. Not breaking, disengaging. Like a part of me that had realized it wasn't needed anymore. My life didn't require passion to continue. It required maintenance. So I maintained. Weeks blurred together. When I looked back, time felt compressed, as if entire stretches of my life had passed without leaving fingerprints. I could tell you what I had done, but not what I had felt. Feeling had become optional. At night, when distractions faded, I felt it more clearly. A dull pressure in my chest, not anxiety, not sadness, just the awareness that I was living on the surface of my own life. Watching it instead of inhabiting it. I asked myself questions I didn't want to answer. What am I waiting for? How long have I been saying, not yet? The answers were uncomfortable, so I softened them. I told myself I was still young enough. Still early enough. Still in time. I didn't notice when those phrases stopped being true and started being soothing. The moment that finally unsettled me didn't come with panic. It came quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day. I realized that nothing in my life felt urgent anymore, not because everything was right, but because I had trained myself to avoid urgency. Nothing was pulling me forward. That's when the fear changed shape. I wasn't afraid of failing. I was afraid of never beginning. I saw how easy it would be to keep living this way. How smoothly my life could continue without ever demanding a decision from me. I could survive indefinitely inside this quiet, manageable version of existence. And suddenly, that felt terrifying. I understood something I had been avoiding for years: time doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for readiness. It moves, whether you step into it or not. I hadn't ruined my life. I hadn't lost it in one mistake. I had been slowly handing it over to waiting. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I reached the end of my life and realized that nothing dramatic had gone wrong. I had just never stepped fully into it. That thought stayed with me. Not loudly. Persistently. Like a question that refused to be postponed. Once that thought settled in, what if nothing ever goes wrong, and I still never live? The quiet around me changed. It stopped feeling neutral. It started feeling heavy, like a room where the air has slowly run out. I began to notice how deeply waiting had shaped me. How instinctively I delayed anything that might demand courage. I didn't reject opportunities outright, I postponed them politely. I didn't say no to life. I said, not yet, so many times that life eventually stopped asking. Waiting had taught me how to appear calm while feeling hollow. My days were efficient. That's what disturbed me most. I could complete them on autopilot. Wake up, move through obligations, return home, repeat. Nothing in that cycle required my presence, only my compliance. I could be tired, distracted, emotionally absent, and everything would still function. That should have felt like stability. It felt like erasure. My body started reacting in ways I could no longer ignore. Sleep stopped restoring me. I woke up already exhausted, as if I had spent the night bracing myself against the day ahead. Ordinary moments carried a weight I couldn't explain, sitting in traffic, answering messages, listening to conversations that felt rehearsed. I told myself it was stress. Everyone is stressed. But stress comes from doing too much. What I felt came from not moving at all. I realized how often I had mistaken restraint for wisdom. How easily I had convinced myself that avoiding risk was the same as being intelligent. Every time I chose comfort over uncertainty, I told myself I was being responsible. But responsibility without direction becomes a cage. Late at night, I replayed memories with a strange kind of grief. Not nostalgia, grief. I mourned moments that could have mattered if I had been braver. Conversations I kept superficial. Decisions I softened until they disappeared. Versions of myself that never had the chance to exist because I was waiting to feel ready. I had believed that waiting preserved possibility. Now I could see it was slowly killing it. The moral dilemma became unavoidable. If I continued waiting, nothing catastrophic would happen. That was the promise of delay. I would remain intact, respected, functional. I would grow older inside a life that made sense on paper. If I stopped waiting, if I acted without certainty, I would have to face consequences I could no longer blame on timing. I would risk regret of a different kind. I would have to confront the possibility that I had waited too long, that some doors were already closed. That possibility terrified me. Some nights, the idea of disappearing crossed my mind. Not dying, disappearing. Leaving the life that had formed around my hesitation. Starting somewhere I wasn't already defined by delay and caution. The thought scared me. It also made my chest feel lighter. That contradiction stayed with me. I couldn't unfeel it. I couldn't unsee what waiting was doing to me. Delay had stopped being a pause. It had become my identity. I tried to talk myself back into patience. I reminded myself how dangerous impulsive decisions can be. How many people regret acting too quickly. How stability is something you protect, not gamble with. Those arguments had always worked before. Now they sounded like excuses. Then came a moment so ordinary it almost slipped past me. Someone asked me, casually, without judgment, "Are you happy right now?" I opened my mouth to answer automatically. To say something neutral. Something safe. Something that would end the conversation. Instead, I froze. In that silence, something became painfully clear: I didn't know. Not because the answer was complicated, but because I had stopped asking myself the question years ago. I had replaced happiness with manageability. Meaning with safety. Desire with delay. That realization hurt more than any obvious failure ever could have. I understood then that my life wasn't wrong. It wasn't broken. It wasn't tragic. It was unfinished. And the longer I waited, the more unfinished it became. For the first time, waiting felt like an active choice instead of a temporary state. And once you see that, neutrality disappears. Every day you postpone becomes a decision to keep living a smaller version of your life. I didn't know yet what I would do. But I knew this: if I kept waiting for the right moment, I would eventually wake up in a life where no moment required courage anymore, because I had trained myself to avoid it completely. And that felt more frightening than acting ever could. I didn't step forward because I suddenly felt brave. I stepped forward because I finally understood that waiting was no longer neutral, it was choosing a life that required less and less of me. There was no dramatic turning point. No announcement. No moment where everything aligned and felt safe. The decision came quietly, almost reluctantly, like a truth I could no longer keep avoiding. I acted knowing it might be too late for some things. That was the hardest part to accept. For years, I believed that waiting protected me from regret. That acting too late was worse than not acting at all. I didn't realize that delay creates its own kind of regret, one that grows silently, without resistance, until it becomes part of who you are. When I finally moved, fear didn't disappear. It followed me closely. It told me I had missed my window. That whatever I tried now would only remind me of what I hadn't done earlier. That I would spend the rest of my life wondering how different things could have been if I had acted sooner. Some days, that fear felt convincing. But something else changed the moment I stopped waiting. Time stopped slipping past me unnoticed. Days became heavier, not because they were worse, but because they demanded my presence. I could feel the consequences of my actions immediately. Even mistakes felt real instead of abstract. Even disappointment felt honest. I was no longer living in hypotheticals. I grieved what I had lost. That grief didn't fade once I began moving. I mourned the years spent postponing myself, the chances softened into later, until they vanished, the versions of my life that will never exist because I waited for certainty that never comes. But I stopped letting that grief decide for me. I learned something painful and freeing at the same time: regret doesn't come from acting late. It comes from never acting at all. From confusing patience with fear and caution with wisdom. From believing that waiting preserves possibility when it actually erases it. Acting didn't give me back the past. It gave me back authorship. I was no longer watching my life move forward while standing still inside it. I was participating again, imperfectly, unevenly, without guarantees. Some outcomes disappointed me. Some confirmed my fears. Not everything worked out. But none of it felt empty. That was the difference. I stopped measuring my life by how safe it looked and started noticing how alive it felt. Even uncertainty carried meaning now, because it was tied to choices I had made instead of days I had endured. I understood something I wish I had learned earlier: time doesn't punish you for waiting, it simply keeps going without you. It doesn't warn you when later turns into never. It doesn't announce when hesitation becomes habit. It just moves. If you're listening to this and telling yourself you're still waiting for the right moment, ask yourself, honestly, how long you've been saying that. Ask yourself whether waiting is still protecting you, or quietly replacing your life with something smaller and easier to manage. Because one day, without collapse or catastrophe, you may realize that nothing dramatic ever went wrong, and you still never arrived anywhere. I thought I had time. I thought readiness would come first. What finally came was understanding. Waiting didn't ruin my life. But it almost erased it. And the moment I stopped waiting, my life didn't become easy, it became mine. That was worth everything I thought I was protecting.